Well, welcome to the Energizing America podcast, where we talk all things energy while leading in our business, community, and life.
One of the underrated factors in talking, I'm kind of going all around, is just the national security part of it. And then where I'm noticing with permitting, what's interesting too is like we talk about NorthMet, they're going into year 20 of permitting. I mean, we have kids up on Iron Range that have grown up learning about a project, never to see even a shovel in the ground. But in Arizona, there's 3 copper projects that have been permitted in 3 years that only need state and private land, 3 to 5 years. There's the Cactus Mine. There's a project called the Johnson Camp Mine by Gunnison Copper that just opened. They're actually producing copper cathodes right on site. I believe that was a pretty minimal permitting process in comparison to what we're seeing in Minnesota. And then I'm missing a third one. I'll get back to you on that, but yeah.
Well, so let's go back up to the Iron Range here. You're telling me that one of the projects has taken 20 years and we still don't have a permit.
Yeah. I mean, well, and technically NorthMet was fully permitted at one point, but because of the legal system in Minnesota, I mean, a lot of those permits were stayed or like stuck in litigation. And then the previous administration, the Army Corps, revoked one of their permits. And so, yeah, I mean, it's still stuck in permitting.
So part of the messaging here that you're finding success in is trying to tie this narrative into a bigger narrative.
Yeah,
so that
it's a national security issue.
And it literally is. Are you finding a response to that when you message that way? When you're trying to bridge that gap, are people able to connect it better? Or are you still like, you got to attack this on all levels?
I think people understand a little bit better. The interesting thing, what I've noticed is when we focus on the economics of things and why we need copper or why we need nickel, especially on the Iron Range, if I focus on the technologies that are used, which is still important, like the economics or like the technologies used, I mean, the economics of it is what makes me most passionate about it. And the national security thing I think is fascinating. If you focus on the economics or, how much tonnage of copper goes into a wind turbine, they have something to refute. They say, we could mine the copper in Arizona because there's less water that's vulnerable, less of a water supply to make vulnerable or to pollute. And in Arizona, it's funny, the opposition groups there say we have too little of water to risk. So their arguments are like mine, where like you can scale it across the country and just kind of change it to whatever region you're in. But on the national security thing, there really isn't much of a response. I don't think so. That I would say, to answer your question, a lot of people relate to that. And then what I've noticed with opposition groups, they really don't have an answer to that when you bring up national security. And to me, the picture perfect project for that is Stibnite, because how can you argue with the fact that, okay, if this project isn't permitted, we as a country, let's say if all the countries in the U.S. cut us off from supply of antimony, we would not have the ability to make armor-piercing bullets for our soldiers. Like if a foreign entity were to come start shooting at us, we would not have the ability to make our own bullets to shoot back. That's a problem. Scary. That's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And it's because of our broken federal permitting system.
So what's interesting about it, I think this is where if we stay on economics, it allows opposition groups to come in with the yeah buts, right? Who's really benefiting economically? The wealthy get wealthier. They can come up with so many different arguments. So if we can try as a society to find something we can all agree on, like national security is one of them, and we start driving the messaging from there, we have a little better pathway. It's much like in the oil and gas when I started doing more advocacy for it. I realized that if I just talked about like the need for oil, people didn't really respond. But if I told them, like Red River did a really good job out of Gillette, Wyoming with this, that like you realize the shirt you're wearing is made with oil. All of a sudden people would dial back. Like you realize toothpaste has oil in it.
Yeah.
All of a sudden people dial back. We have to find some common ground, and it feels like it's been so missing in our country and let alone our state of Minnesota, that we go from an agenda rather than common ground. So if we start from a common ground that we want more renewables, we want national security and all of these things. Now, what's the best way to get it? We're going to find out. Permitting a mine in northern Minnesota is a really efficient, good way to do it, right in our own backyard where we all win, oh, by the way, socially and economically.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so often we start with the economic conversation and people just turn off. especially when they're hurting.
Well, and when you mentioned the toothpaste thing, just from like a leadership standpoint, and it's not a knock on anyone. It's more just if I were running a state, and let's say if I'm trying to get, because you make a great point about the oil and toothpaste connection, and it's extremely underrated, is if I'm running a state, and because Minnesota is blessed to hold an estimated third of the copper reserves in the U.S. and over 80% of U.S. cobalt reserves and over 95% of nickel reserves via Minnesota's Duluth complex, and the other 5% of nickel reserves is being mined by the Eagle Mine in the UP of Michigan, but they're finding some nickel too in Montana, interestingly enough. But if I'm a leader of a state, and let's say if I'm trying to say, you know what, I want more EV charging stations, I want more EVs, whether I'm pushing it through policy or just simple advocacy, like just hoping more of my constituents buy these things. My number one goal from an economic standpoint is, okay, how do I keep as much of that supply chain within my state? Like, how do I bring that here? How do I have the mining, the refining, the smelting, the processing, the manufacturing of that within my own state so that we're kicking it, economically, like we're really killing it. And that is not the philosophy of many, where it's like, it's like, okay, like, great, you're advocating for this stuff, then advocate for that supply chain to be here so that we can benefit from the positive aspects of these technologies that you're advocating for, but also economically too.
Right. Instead of, one of our mines struck an agreement in the last couple of years where we're taking some byproduct and we're shipping it across the border over to North Dakota where they're processing it.
Talent.
Over there.
Well, and then also too, they're taking old iron ore tailings that was mined during the World War II area, and they're shipping it to North Dakota for pig iron. They make pig iron. Why aren't we just building the facilities right here? It's
too obvious almost.
And I'm not
Ryan.
speaking for them. I'm not saying that's right. They went over there because of Minnesota. But I'm speculating. So I'm not talking for them. But it's just kind of. Yeah.
So out of the, you mentioned several statistics about how much of these precious metals are found right here in Minnesota. Of that percentage, so there's 100% copper around somewhere. Some crazy percentage. Did you say 85% of it is in the
third of the
complex?
copper.
A third of it is in the Duluth
and then a
complex.
lot of the other copper. Well, there's a lot in Alaska. There's a lot of people don't know. There's a decent. At one point, Montana was our largest copper producing state, I believe. So there's a lot of Montana, Idaho, Arizona, Nevada.
But there's 1/3 that exists in Minnesota. How much of it is mined?
None of it.
Is that not horrible? Especially given the requirements, how necessary copper is today. It recently, in the last 2 months, hit the highest it's ever been. I don't follow that daily, what the price of copper is, but the raw cost of copper in the marketplace was the highest it's ever been. And we have 1/3 of the available copper sitting underneath our ground that we're not mining. And everyone, if you don't realize, you go buy a vehicle, let's talk about batteries. I mean, everything electrical requires copper.
Yeah.
You can't do anything electrically without copper.
Yep.
And so, is this not a problem?
Well, obviously, yeah. I mean, it's
it's in a state, by the way, governed where we claim to be the most environmentally responsible and want the right thing. Well, you cannot just want it; you have to act on it. Mm-hmm. And if you want that, let's act. Let's get this pushed through. And by the way, the economic ripple effect is going to be huge in a state that could really, really use it.
Absolutely.
I think that's really important. So if we talk, in the Twin Ports, we have this all up on the Iron Range. A lot of this stuff is getting mined up there. People are winning economically. It's coming down south here to the Duluth Twin Ports area, Duluth Superior, via trains and trucks, and then it's getting put on ships going throughout the local Great Lakes and all over the world from here. What is that? Why all of a sudden you stepped back and you said, boy, where else is this stuff coming from? Or was it your specific members driving you saying, hey, Ryan, I see some success that you're messaging in Minnesota. I want you to help message me. And then you started getting more involved in flying down to Arizona and going into those copper mines. Your mind must have been blown away when you did.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, one thing that's cool about Arizona is they're actually permitting new mines. And their states want them, the state and their local policymakers want to see their mines be a success. And the whole experience was pretty surreal. If I'm gonna be straight up on that, Shane, is what brought us to Arizona was where I was fortunate was my board. No one ever said, hey, Ryan, here's a blueprint. This is how we're going to get you to Arizona. Like I was never pushed to go to Arizona. It was more just a passion where I'm like, okay, we can take this model to different states. And what brought us to Arizona was after Twin Metals got their leases revoked in the previous administration, and the Army Corps got revoked PolyMet, now New Range Copper Nichols North Met projects permit. Resolution Copper was also there. They have it's actually similar to North Met, where they need to have a federal land swap get approved and pushed through, because they're going to be trading some private land for some federal land, because that's where Resolution Copper's deposit is. And if they were up and mining today, they'd be the largest copper mine in the U.S. and they would be producing enough copper to supplement a quarter of U.S. copper demand alone, that project. And their land swap was delayed under the previous administration. And I noticed a lot of their messaging was very similar to what New Range's messaging and what, Twin and some of these other projects were messaging. And so I just naturally reached out to them and started pitching them ideas. I didn't ask them, kind of similar to you. I wasn't asking for membership. I wasn't asking for anything like that. It was more just like, okay, how do I start bringing in some of this messaging? And I was getting fascinated by Arizona because of how much they produce in copper. I mean, they got massive copper mines there. And then I was noticing that they were permitting mines in a timely fashion. And so then Resolution Copper started getting really interested in being a part of us. And then I got invited to speak at the Arizona Mining Association's conference. And then shortly after that, they verbally agreed to join as a partner, where they're investing as much as the Minnesota companies.
That's awesome. And that really opened up the national landscape for like the Aaron Turners and the Dirt Worlds to all of a sudden be looking at Duluth and coming here and speaking at our local.
Well, and part of the reason why and part of the reason why I invite the Keaton Turners and the Aaron Witts, and then even before Aaron Witt, there was Lucy Crane. She's a geologist out of the United Kingdom. I want my goal for Better in Backyard is that we remember our roots, where, we do a lot of our events in Duluth, but we still do some national stuff like our expo in a few weeks. But in this region, I think you look at any region across the country, I think we all have this natural instinct to just kind of be within our own group and kind of just focus on the people around us. And, I'm just, and not a knock on the events in the area, but I just noticed a lot of the same speakers and a lot of the same events. And I just noticed Keaton style and Aaron Wood style and Lucy Crane style from the UK. And I just I want to bring new blood to the area, and I want to bring big thinkers to our events. And for us to think not just about our region, but past our region too, fully. And when I reached out to Aaron, I didn't think he would say yes, and he said yes. And then when I reached out to Keaton Turner to speak, I didn't think he was going to say yes, and he said yes. So, my number one goal, and it's similar with the expo. I mean, we have over 50 speakers that are confirmed to speak, and I would say 40 of them off the top of my head are outside of the state of Minnesota. It's because I just want new people and fresh perspectives coming to the area, because, I want people on the Iron Range to realize the state of Arizona is permitting mines in 3 to 5 years. This is doable. Like, there should be no excuses with our regulators in Minnesota. Like, if different states like Idaho and Arizona and Wyoming, they just permitted a new copper and gold project in 3 to 5 years called the CK Gold Project, there is no excuse for our agencies not to be able to permit projects in a timely fashion in this state. And so that's partly too why I like to bring outside perspectives into this, because I think we get so sometimes tunnel visioned
on why it's almost because it's always been this way, it has to be this way.
Yeah, like there's just the excuses for the agencies on why they're taking their time on issuing permits, and it's like, well, no, if other states are doing it,
they have
it's
the
just
same
like running a
federal
business.
government.
If you're seeing that a different electrical contractor is doing something more efficiently, whether it's in your prefab, whether it's, in an oil and gas job or a data center or whatever, your first thought isn't to make excuses as an entrepreneur on why you're not there. You're wondering, how do I get to that point?
Exactly.
And our agencies don't have that mindset.
And that's just interesting in of itself, but I think sometimes they truly haven't realized that it can be done. They can blame the feds, they can blame all the different agencies they have to go through, but all these other states have those same exact hoops, and they're getting it done, so let's get it done here. When we think about nationally, do you think that the change into renewable energy and the demand for precious metals, that whole issue has caused that to go quicker? Like, I wonder if we were to go back and look 20 years ago, could you get a mine permitted in Arizona in 3 to 5 years? Or did Arizona just recognize this national security issue quicker and adapt to it quicker?
Well, I think a lot of it is just like local economics. I mean, like the state of Arizona is the number one mining state in the country. So they just always had a long, strong history of permitting. So I think more of it is just
a can do, better do attitude.
Well, yeah, and just God, I'm trying to think, not a philosophy. It's just how they do things. And, like, it's just how they permitted I mean, they've been historically mining. I mean, their history with copper mining in Arizona is very similar to our history with taconite and iron ore mining. Like, we've been mining ore, we say we've been mining iron ore for over 135, 140 years. They're saying the same thing in Arizona when you go to their events. Like, we've been mining copper. We know how to do this. We've been doing this for 140 years. And so I think it's philosophy because you notice in Minnesota, where I give credit is that they are friendlier, obviously, to taconite than they are for copper and nickel in terms of if they were as unfriendly to taconite, Mesabi Metallics wouldn't have fully got permitted.
Yeah.
So,
right.
it's because they know, because leadership knows that if we don't have taconite mines running up and healthy, the Iron Range will die and Duluth will hurt and the rest of the state will slowly get impacted. But we just haven't had the copper nickel component. So what I think we need is one project like a NorthMet to be a success. And then hopefully agencies will see that and they'll know that when Talon needs to get permitted or when other projects like Twin needs to get permitted, that, okay, NorthMet's doing it safely. These other projects are trying to meet the same requirements and they are meeting those standards. We should be able to permit one of them. And I think all it's going to take is one success story in the state for it to have a good positive ripple effect. And I think that's what some people are scared of, though, too.
Is that one success?
Yeah, is that one success?
Because they know then the door has been opened. But tell me a little bit about the leadership when you're working with these members of yours that are trying to get this through the permitting. Do you believe them when they say they want to do it safely and responsibly?
Oh, absolutely. I think one good example is Dean DeBeltz. I mean, he's one of Twin Metals' directors and basically runs the Ely office, and he's from Ely. I mean, so if there's any, like, if Twin Metals isn't a success and they pollute the local environment, he has to answer to everyone in his community. You think he wants to wake up and do that? So like he has both a personal and professional obligation to make sure that mine's up and running safely and meeting the highest environmental standards in the world.
And you know what's interesting about it, Ryan, is so often the people, the opposition is really far away and they're acting like they want to protect communities that they're not part of. And the people in those communities that are part of it are there to harm their community.
Yeah.
And I've said this so many times about even in oil and gas or any of our heavy industrial facilities we work in. We find ourselves down at the shipyards and the rail yards, and we're in mines and we're in oil and gas and we're in industrial facilities, right? We get dirty. We have boots on and our hands are dirty. So far, every one of those people love hunting, fishing, and their land. They love it.
Yeah.
Far more than Susie Q working in an engineering firm in downtown Duluth. Far more. So you think that they don't have the right intent? They're the ones who are going to hurt the most if we don't do this right. And
Yeah.
I think that story gets lost.
I agree. Well, I mean, yeah, I think miners are some of the best environmentalists in the world. I mean, obviously there's exceptions, but there's exceptions to everything. There's always, yeah, I agree with you, what you just said.
And I wonder now when we think about where we're going to go from here, as Better in Our Backyard continues to message and continues to take this message kind of across, it seems like you're talking more about natural resources and the need to do it here. Am I seeing that message correctly?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And so now you planned your first ever annual conference, it sounds like.
Yes.
Are you hoping it's annual?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the intent. I mean, we're going to have probably 250 to 300 people at our conference in a few weeks. We have the Deputy Secretary of the Interior being our premier keynote. John Cherry, the former CEO of Polymet, now he's the CEO of Stibnite, actually, ironically, Perpetuous Project in Idaho, is giving a morning keynote. One of the GMs from Resolution Copper is giving the lunch keynote. And then in addition to them, we have 50 plus speakers that are going to be on either panels or doing sessions from different mining companies across the country. So we're going to have 20 to 25 different mining and energy companies represented, both in Minnesota and throughout the U.S. And, I say it's a 250 to 300 person event by the time we get there. But I'm hoping long term it turns into something where 1,000 people are coming to this. We don't have one this year, but future plans or future state is that we're going to have like a vendor hall, and where the Wescoms of the world can set up a booth, and then have sessions from proposed projects across the country, or different session speakers on various topics, and then keynotes throughout the day. But long term, what I want this to be is a cornerstone event for both the mining and energy spaces. So by energy, I mean whether it's renewable, nuclear, oil and gas. mining, both non-ferrous and ferrous. So, I mean, we've had some interest from the iron mining industry getting involved with this expo. I want basically literally an all above the energy approach and mining approach to this expo where, a few years from now, I'm talking to you about how, Shane, we just hit 1,000 people at this conference.
But tell me, you're saying it's a cornerstone of this, but what's the ultimate goal from it? You're hoping to have a good conversation that people can then bring back to their communities?
And then part of it too is just I think leadership in Minnesota doesn't really recognize, whether it's from our two senators or whether it's from the governor, doesn't recognize the positive impacts of mining and energy in this state. And so what I'm hoping, future state is that it turns into a big enough event where they have no excuse but to come in and say some welcome remarks, or like local state representatives, and say, I want them to just kind of see it. Like, okay, this is how much of a positive impact industry has. And they're not only, and these people from Montana and Arizona are coming here and they're investing in a city like Bloomington. And, our local city councilors here and, state officials don't really look at mining very friendly. But yet they're here and they're bringing in millions of revenues for this event, and spending money here locally. And so, I don't know if it's going to have that change, but yeah, to answer, and then also too, just from a value add standpoint, I want the Wescoms of the world and the Lakeheads of the world to go there and from a membership value standpoint, from an entrepreneurial standpoint and business standpoint, I want this to be a potential opportunity for companies to build on existing relationships or potentially get new clients.
Yeah, I think
from a networking standpoint,
really important to highlight that for anyone listening, that when you go to these kind of conferences, I've went to energy conferences my whole career, and I have met so many incredible people that eventually become customers and or partners. But what I've really been able to take away is where the market is headed and where I need to play a role in it. I would have never realized the difficulty in getting a pipeline from the Bakken over to Grand Forks within one state, by the way. And the difficulty
in a state that likes pipelines.
Yeah, exactly. The difficulties in that and where Wescom could fit into helping solve that, because ultimately it trickles down to work for me and keeps our 300 plus people out working, energizing America. And I think if you don't go participate in these conferences and listen to the CEOs and the leaders as to where they're bringing the markets or what they're seeing, you're going to lack the foresight to make those judgment calls when it comes. So hopefully you will get a lot of service providers that are sitting in the audience listening, that the leaders are out looking at and going, wait, that's somebody out there that's depending on me to keep going, because this fight gets old.
I agree. I mean, I love this, and sometimes I even get tired too. And I absolutely love what I do. And and you're reminding me of some other thoughts that I had too, because like when you're in the midst of like making sure every day-to-day operations are going and that events are going, it's easy to lose sight of what your end goal is. So I appreciate you asking that question. Because you're reminding me of my like initial thoughts for doing this is that we've invited every state representative and state senator in Minnesota to come to the expo. And one good example of how I'm hoping that this event could change how people think is, number one, like how can the Shane Stopps of the world and others leave and ask themselves, how can we better tell our story and market ourselves outside of the connections they may make that could benefit their business. But also though too is back to the permitting. Our morning keynote is called after John Cherry's keynote, we're also having a keynote panel immediately after his speech. And it's called the Permitted Copper Projects Panel. And there's going to be a representative from Gunnison Copper, Wyoming CK Gold Project, the president and CEO from that. And then Adam Hawkins, he's going to talk about the Cactus Mine. And then Chris Temple is going to be moderating it. And the fourth panelist is Barry O'Shea, the president and CEO of Highland Copper. These are all copper projects that have been fully permitted in a 5-year period, roughly. They're only on state and private land. And so I'm hoping elected officials go there and see the panel and say, okay, these are 4 different copper projects that, when you combine their permitting timelines, is still less than what NorthMet's permitting timeline is. So, I hope that opens up their eyes, like saying, okay, maybe this is a little ridiculous that it's taking 20 years to permit a new copper mine in Minnesota.
For sure. Have you gotten any positive response from the 2 state senators for showing up at this event or the federal Senate? Sorry, the U.S.
No,
senators?
not yet. Their staff is copied on our things. and then admittedly, I still I got to make sure they're invited and double check on that. But every state senator and every state rep has been invited.
Okay.
To the expo. We've invited the governor to do opening speeches at our dinners in the past in Duluth, and we don't really get too much feedback.
Okay. And I have done a podcast with Pete Stauber, and it was one of the most fascinating podcasts ever because he talks so much
He's
about...
going to be at the expo.
Yeah. And I hope I get to catch up with him because he is such an advocate for us on the federal level, which is we have to win on all levels, right? Local, state, and federal. And this is why it's so important to use online mediums because where else do you find local, state, and federal? You can't, like, we can try at these conferences, but if they don't show up, we don't get them, right? But it's hard for them to ignore us online, especially when there's a bunch of people talking about it. The chatter eventually makes its way to DC, over to the state capitol, and down to the local Ely City Council, right? I mean, that happens through multiple mediums, not the least of which is online. But I sure hope that these officials can dedicate a little bit of time and come and actually learn. And then what they can do is in their town halls with their constituents is explain that, yeah, you might think that, but guess what? Copper is getting mined somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And why not right here in our backyard? This was one of the premises of our very first podcast that we had such a fascinating conversation about, Ryan, is that stuff has to be pulled out of the ground. Why would we not do it here?
Well, and another cool thing about all the copper projects is that I think we produce 50% of our own copper consumption. So we have to import 50%. And a lot of our copper production in the U.S., we still have to send over to different countries like Japan and maybe even parts of South America or even China for processing. And then they're going to ship it back to us so that we can use the copper cathodes here in the U.S. But if all the proposed copper projects were up and running today, the U.S. would be copper independent. Similar to how we advocate for energy independence, we would be copper independent and potentially a net exporter of copper.
And by the way, in the meantime, we don't have to ship stuff across the beautiful oceans that we love.
And one of the most important topics, too, that people don't realize is that I think in the 80s, we had over 30 active copper refineries and smelters. And today we have 2. There's one in Utah and one in Arizona, and they're already at max capacity. And so, one thing I will give I don't really give them credit because then you turn around and you got to tell them permitting reform, right? But, opposition groups say, well, if all these projects are up and running, they got to, export it to like Canada or different parts of the country or the world for processing. It's like, so then my response to them is like, okay, great. Help us with permitting reform so that we can build new copper refineries in Minnesota and Arizona so that we can keep that supply chain here because those jobs associated with the processing and smelting, we talk about average mining wages, they're similar too. All these industrial wages, whether it's in the pipeline, mining sectors, they're all great paying jobs that support families. And so, the next battle and one of the things that I like to input into our messaging about copper production in the U.S. is that I want to mine, refine copper here in America so that it's 100% purely made copper, American-made copper.
And everybody wins in that.
Yep.
Right? Because right now, yeah, true. In the meantime, we might have to export it to be refined and import it back into the good that we need. But we're still better off. Either way, the ship is coming from somewhere.
But it's like, I want people to get creative, like on how, like, okay, let's say if Twin, Talon, and New Range are up and running today. How can we get a copper refinery in Minnesota where they're just immediately sending their concentrates to that smelter? I'm oversimplifying it, but it's like, so that's it. The refining and smelting portion of it is extremely important.
And what's fascinating about it is we know it can be done because we have a paper mill right here in town right now going through a massive expansion in an industry that allegedly can't exist anymore. But it's being done right here in northern Minnesota because it got the private and public support for it. And it felt like overnight, all of a sudden, next to the freeway in downtown Duluth, there's this big addition on a paper mill happening. There could be a copper mine and a copper facility overnight if we really wanted it.
Yeah.
And so we need to continue to push, even though it's difficult. This is tiring work, right? You don't see success overnight. You don't get to see a lot of the projects that you're advocating for still haven't come to fruition. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to measure the needle, how far you've moved it. Then you throw in this recent event this week, even with the Mr. Kirk situation, and you think about advocacy and how far do we push this and where do we go with this before it becomes into danger level, you know,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
where are we at as a country? Why can't we just get back to the basics here? So I really commend you, Ryan, and the growth of Better in Our Backyard and what you've been able to pull off here to help advocate for this. I know that there's 300 plus of us at Wescom and all of our vendors and our customers, and we all benefit from your advocacy. And sometimes it's hard to say, well, maybe we don't benefit directly, you know, like we can't tie a dollar back to a deal, right? But what we can tie it back to is a better educated society as to the need for natural resources, where they come from and how we use them, and why not use them right here in our backyard, take them all right here and reuse them here where we can do it economically, socially, and do it well environmentally. Why wouldn't we do it right here? And so any voice out there doing that has my full support, because we're not in business without it. And more importantly, I'm not warm at home without it.
Yeah.
That's at the end of the day, like, sure, I can go get a job anywhere. You could go get a job anywhere, right? But in 20 years, when Russia decides to misbehave or China decides to misbehave and we can't fire a bullet, we got a real problem.
Yeah.
We have a real issue. So in the meantime, let's all get on the same page here, have the honest discussion as to how we can go forward. So please keep up the good work.
Oh, I appreciate it, Shane. Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah.
I like the studio.
It's been a fascinating discussion, and I could go on all day about it, Ryan.